Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode. This is 595 episode, and we will discuss on edge computing. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith and Professor Rob. First, I would like to give chance Professor David Smith.
Thank you so much, Sharif. Edge of cloud computing, edge of computing as you have it, is a term that is really taking a lot of steam and momentum in it. And it's because the importance of data has grown so much. And data is distributed all around the at world as you begin to get it. And the other thing that's driving edge of cloud computing is the movement towards real-time computing. And that in many instances, traditional cloud computing can give us something called near real time, but not real time. So what edge computing is it refers to the processes, the analyzing and the storing data closer to where it's generated. So you want to, as opposed to a central cloud server, you want to put the computer processing, the analysis part, and the storage close to where it is generated so that you can enable the rapid real-time analysis and response. It's really kind of interesting. Many companies have begun to work at centralizing data storage and computing in the cloud. So this is kind of like we talked about yesterday with the old mainframe type of data centers. But then you see the demands of new use cases because we're having millions and billions of distributed devices, from advanced warehouses, inventory management system, vision enhanced robots, manufacturing lines, autonomous transportation, smart city traffic control systems, and others. These have made this old centralized model kind of unsustainable. Additionally, what we really see is that the Internet of Things, which we've talked about so much over the last several months, with devices such as smart cameras, mobile point of sale kiosks, medical sensors, all types of intelligent computing devices spread out around the network. And increasingly, those type of devices used with augmented reality and others that are really pushing the need for faster, real-time, actionable insights at the data source. And it's really pushing that way tremendously. The marketplace for cloud computing is really huge. Just for the AI-led edge computing only, which is what we talked about this week, that market size is 34 billion just by itself, and really is taking off and growing. You see all of the big companies playing in it. You see the parts going. The big data analysis part of edge of cloud computing is going to be worth $655 billion by 2029. The 5G part growing. All these different size elements are coming in with what makes up edge of cloud computing. In my personal sphere, we exercise edge of cloud computing in several of our portfolio companies that we do. In our healthcare portfolio company, the sensors are edge of cloud because you want that real time. You know, if I'm in a hospital bed, I want my sensors to be real time. If I'm driving an autonomous car, I don't want to have a network lag cause me to run off the road or worse, kill somebody. You begin to look at things. If I'm using facial recognition with Internet of Things facial recognition, I want those results back very rapidly and begin to do it. So those are some of the types of drivers. And you see them in many, many different areas. You see them manufacturing, agricultural, transportation, healthcare. The list goes on and on. But edge of cloud really is a approach that is really here to come. We're going to start pushing it further and further to the edge with what we're doing, because it really is an empowering device when you take into account that it reduces latency. it lets you have higher bandwidth capacity across the network with really less computing on each of the types of devices like that. In many ways, it increases the computing ability. Security is an issue with it, but in some ways it increases the security because you localize it. And it does give you actionable real-time data, which is the really very important. One of the big constraints right now is looking at what are the latency requirements for these new devices and government regulations. Government regulations are still coming in place on this one, particularly around privacy, data access, collection, where the data can reside in multinational companies. And many times data needs to stay local, on-premise, encrypted. This is particularly true in industries such as finance, health, and safety. But Sharif, I think that gets us into it so that we can hear Rob's more industry-centric responses.
Thank you, Professor Rob.
So edge computing shifts the dynamic. We went from the mainframe areas where everything was centralized. We went to client-server computing, where you were supposed to have a balance, and for much of the time, the client-server computing was popular. It didn't work. That was an interesting hype cycle. And then we moved to personal computers, where most everything was decentralized, and then layered on top the internet. Which kind of bifurcated the experience. Then we moved into the various forms of industry initiatives. One of the last big ones was called big data, where everybody and their brother was collecting as much data as they could. And since it was unstructured, they didn't know what to do with it. So you had these massive data centers in the United States. The most famous was the one that was centrally located and under the CIA's budget. Where they built this massive data center and captured all this data, and then they couldn't make any sense of it. We just horribly done. What edge computing does is again shifts the dynamic. It shifts the dynamic where the constraint isn't compute or storage. The constraint is the network that you're trying to optimize. And so what edge computing does is it takes the information that the device, the IoT device, often, and as Dave mentioned, a lot of cameras, and it does analysis at the edge and then sends a subset of the data to either an intermediary point or the endpoint where the data is. What it remains is analyzed, and then a report or alert or whatever, depending on the application, is generated. But it is focused on the constraint of the network, trying to minimize the amount of traffic you're putting across the network while still providing the same level of performance you had if everything was centralized again. The difficulty is when you're talking about edge computing is what you're losing and making sure that information is captured. The example I used the last time we talked about this topic, I'll use again. And that was the centralized distribution facility of Amazon, where they. And by the way, I should point out I have a hard stop at 8:30. So they had an issue at Amazon. They had a large number of people that were complaining about very late deliveries, and they couldn't figure out why. Amazon is heavily instrumented. And they kind of know where every package is, and when it's late and when it's not. And their instrumentation reports were showing no lateness, at least not at this level. Stuff was arriving on time, and so you had a large number of customers saying the packages were late, and internal controls saying, they're not. And what turned out was happening is the way it was supposed to happen is a package went from one of these central distribution warehouse points to a remote distributor who then delivered it to the home. But they had a manager of one of these large warehouse repositories who decided he thought he could do it better and was having his people do the deliveries, and that's where it was breaking. And the reason they couldn't figure out why it was happening is because the software that was doing the tracking was preset, because they knew, or at least they believed, the distribution centers were not doing deliveries, that any delivery information was stripped from the data before it was sent up to corporate. And so corporate never saw, until they did a forensic audit, what was causing the distribution problems, and that's the nature of the issue you have to overcome with edge computing, is you have to make sure that you are not compromising the data stream in such a way that it underreports or misreports whatever it is it's supposed to be reporting. In other words, it creates a biased data stream. And in some ways, biased data is worse than no data, because at least with no data, you don't have anything. With biased data, you think you've got something, but that something is unreliable, and you don't know how unreliable it is. In fact, you might trust it, and even though it's untrustworthy. And there lies the underlying difficulty. So you have to preserve throughout the process the integrity of the data and make sure that you're capturing everything that needs to be captured. And I would certainly suggest from time to time auditing the process to make sure that things that you would like to capture are not somehow being missed. Taking a security camera that is predominantly set to monitor humans, where you have a lot of animal activity. If attackers were to put on animal face masks, could that security camera be fooled into not sending that data, thinking they were animals as opposed to people? And that may sound far-fetched, but facial recognition software has, at least in its infancy, often misreported people as animals. And so it was initially very easy to fool if you were a person of color because of the way the test sets were set up. So making sure that you do regular tests to assure that the information that you need to make the deterministic decisions that the system was set up to help you make is being received and being properly calculated. So it does require you to look at the system much more comprehensively, because you are intentionally stripping data out of the process, and you need to make sure that the data you're stripping out isn't critical for the decision you're going to arrive in. So it's a process that does require recurring audits, recurring tests, to make sure that the stuff you're stripping out isn't in fact needed at some future point. And you might consider in some implementations some form of local storage or capture for a few days, so that if something does happen and the system doesn't report it, it still exists on the cameras, and the information can be later pulled to do the analysis. Say if you're trying to capture a terrorist or even a catastrophic event, to try to determine what the damages are, or where you need to go to retrieve some of the people. So it's a new concept. It's not that new. We've been talking about edge computing for about 5 years, but it's comparatively new in the age of computing, and still to a certain extent in its infancy. The companies that tend to be driving edge computing are some of the same companies that are driving mobile processing. Intel's active here, Qualcomm's active here, NVIDIA's active here in terms of products and in some cases solutions that deal with this area. But often the concept is to optimize the data stream and to assure that you don't have excessive latency, and that the information can be retrieved from large numbers of data sources.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Is computing in the future? So, what is the future market, and as well as I love to know that how it will create opportunity for our economy, for our economical development.
Well, there's a lot of opportunities for it, because it does bring the power out to where the devices are. In addition to the companies that Rob talked about, though, some of the big other companies that are taking a real interest in this is companies like Siemens, where they manufacture devices to control smart buildings, where they're doing a lot of work in smart cities and other areas like that where there are control systems. I'm surprised Rob didn't mention IBM, but IBM has a lot of efforts in edge of cloud computing. And IBM also distinguishes fog computing as devices sitting in the middle of part of their edge of cloud computing. And what fog computing is, just for intermediary devices. Yeah. Rob talked about how you sometimes need to capture data before it goes back all the way from it and to the main cloud data storage. And fog computing is part of that. But the market size is continuing to grow. The compound annual growth rates, if I look across all the various flavors of edge of cloud computing, it's growing above 50% compound annual growth rate every year. And and as long as we are putting more and more sensors in the network and more devices where real time is there, it's going to continue to go. Gartner estimated last year that by 2025, over 75% of all enterprise generated data is going to be generated at the edge of cloud, outside the company, outside the data center. And that is a remarkable growth driver for edge of cloud computing, is the fact that's there, and the fact that we're doubling the amount of data in the world every 3 years. So if that continues, edge of cloud computing is going to go really much better. And the fact that you're moving those resources to where the data is generated is really pretty straightforward and simple in there. You begin to see the other points just really coming together. The other thing, as you look at the fog computing, is it's not limited to the cloud or the edge. And it goes back to one of the things Rob mentioned earlier when he mentioned client-server computing. That is the fog type of computing is similar to what you saw with client-server, or a concept called departmental computing from way back when in our IT time machine. In that you try to begin to look at the sources, how it's going, and all of the other elements around that. The market drivers are really huge for that. This whole smart cities, smart regions that we've talked about is one where you've got to have a cloud layer. You've got to have the edge of cloud layer. You've got to go ahead and have different types of gateways out there to interface with all the various types of the edge devices. And the fog part of that is, particularly in smart cities and elements like that, it lets you begin to segment that into segments that are understandable and usable. But a lot of opportunities going there.
Thank you, Mr. Markley. We are discussing about age of computing. So what you want to add for today's discussion? Yeah.
So we're talking about computing in what sense and all of that. And by the way, I saw that we had somebody in Miss Virginia that was saying good morning. That's a wonderful. I'm glad that they were saying good morning from Brazil. That's amazing. So we got people watching all the way over there in Brazil. But in the sense of computing, I think that a lot of us are used to the whole computer. And I definitely remember, and I'm sure that even some of our other guests will remember that as well, David and Rob for sure, when computers used to be these big giant machines that took up in the entire, you're a young buck, so you would not remember this, Dr. Sharif, but they took up entire rooms. I'm actually in my apartment, and they probably took up the whole space of my entire kitchen area and all along those lines. And in some cases, they took up almost entire buildings. And now we've got laptops and we've got phones that have got power that is just incredible and all of that. So definitely the computers have come a long way, and I'm not even sure that we're done with how far they will go, because I'm sure there'll be some people that will find ways. And I know that I think Rob and others have talked about it, where the computer might be attached to your glasses and attached to other things, maybe even attached to you, the person, and all of that. So computers are definitely doing some amazing things, and we're still continuing to find new and innovative ways to get involved with that. Definitely the computers are a vital part of our lives. I mean, there was a time that people could not feel that they could survive without some means of transportation, whether that was a car or a bus, and a lot of people still feel that way. And of course, there were times that people felt that there were other amenities and things that they needed in society, even the old-fashioned telephone. And I think most people feel that if they don't have some sort of computer, they are not truly being successful in the sense of being civilized and part of the connected world, because we are a very connected world. I mean, you do have a few people that are trying to, because they feel too connected, get off of the grid and all along those lines. I was actually having a conversation with a friend of mine on that earlier this morning, because they were feeling that their job was trying to find ways to get their cell phone number or to get two-factor authentication or a number of other things that they did not feel totally comfortable with. And while I love the computer, I use my laptop way too much for various work assignments, and of course for the Pod TV network and a number of other things. Because as I told y'all, one of my jobs is grading test papers, and of course those papers come at us through the wonders of the computer, and after the students have written them and all of that, and then we grade according to whatever the rubric is, and all along those lines. But I don't know how Rob or David feel about it, but I'm not too sure. Well, one, I'm kind of have an aversion to needles in the first place, but I'm not too sure how I feel about being directly connected to the computer. I do remember, as I've told y'all before, I'm a Star fan, a Star Trek and Star Wars fan, and in some cases that sounds a little bit too Borgish for me and all of that. And if y'all are familiar with a certain science fiction series, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because I'm going like, wait a minute, are we just going to be connected to these spaceships? Because I know on one of our past shows we were talking about I'm going on space travel. I'm going like, are we just going to be connected to it and it will feed us all along those lines and in that space and everything? And how much true autonomy will we as humans have? Like I said before, I definitely want to make it to 200, and if that's to happen, that would be a miracle and a total miracle. But I don't know that I want to make it to 200 or even 500 by having the immortality of being connected to a computer until it malfunctions, and even those have shelf lives. So I'm not even sure that you would make it to 200 based on the shelf lives of some computers, unless they just kept changing your battery and all along those lines. So yes, folks, including that person from Brazil, I think it was a young lady, I am having fun with some of these comments as well. But I don't know what Rob and David have to say about some of what I'm saying also.
Thank you, Professor Rob.
Sure. Remember, the topic is edge computing. So talking about edge computing again, since I'm done, I'm going to drop. So these will be my final comments. You're predominantly looking at edge computing when you have an excess of sensors capturing large amounts of data that are saturating your network. If your network's not saturated and you don't have a network problem, then you may not need to have smart devices at the end, and you can save that expense. But often we're finding, as we instrument the world and we move from a time where the virtual world and the real world are separate, and into the era of the metaverse, where the two things are not only initially linked but have to remain linked, then the number of sensors we're going to have going forward is going to be significantly greater by several magnitudes to the amount of sensors we have now. And our ability to do things like solve crimes, identify and respond to things that are happening real time, natural disasters, criminal activity, or simply potholes and power outages, or the causes of power outages, are going to go up rather significantly as we instrument the world, and our ability to simulate events before they happen. So if we wanted to see, for instance, how climate change is actually going to affect the world going forward, Earth 2, which is an instrumented metaverse instance, will hopefully help us make those determinations so we can find better remedies, cheaper remedies, and more effective remedies over time. So it's a major part of our progression. And as we think about other aspects like artificial intelligence, it's these sensor networks, these edge computing sensor networks that will be feeding these future AIs, which will be making decisions with regard to power distribution, traffic management, safety and security, utility management, and identifying things that need to be repaired. One of the more interesting solutions I saw recently was a camera setup that was placed in all the police cars, and police cars are commonly covered in cameras. But they used object recognition software to identify the potholes that are in the street, and then provide a report back to the city at the end of the shift with regard to which areas had the biggest problems and where the city should focus its resources to fix the streets. That is an edge computing instance, and it just showcases that you can use it to make cities more efficient, folks' lives better, and hopefully overall a better world. So thanks for the session today, and I'll see you next time.
Yeah, tomorrow we have debate.
Hey, along those same lines, and I know Rob said he had to bounce, but maybe David got some thoughts about this. I guess one of the things I'm curious about is even when we talk about edge computing and some of the things that it is involved in, I think some people are concerned about the way that it might infringe on their own rights and their own freedoms and things of that nature. Oftentimes when you get, whether it's Norton or some of these other security systems, and you want to get an update, you will oftentimes have somebody call you, and they basically are taking over your computer, going into your computer, looking at your data, looking at everything else. I mean, they can be moving stuff around for all you know, and sometimes they're coming from other parts of the globe, and definitely here in the United States, other parts of the United States. So I guess I'm wondering, are there fears that you have, David, about that when we are turning over so much of our autonomy, when the computer is such a vital part of our life and everything, and we're basically saying, hey, yeah, you go in there and you can see what I'm doing on my computer, and maybe there's things on that computer that I don't want you to see. Maybe if I'm in the dating world, I might not want you to see that picture that I sent to the young lady to try to court her and all of that. It might have been me in a muscle shirt. Not that I would look good in a muscle shirt. I would actually look probably kind of fat and chubby in a muscle shirt, but I might not want y'all to see that, and all along those lines. But your thoughts around that?
Well, Mark, I've already captured those images you were talking about. Once you begin to go
in the other dimension again.
So we already have those, but what I want to say is you're actually confusing part of the different parts of the computing ecosystem together. As we begin to look at the devices that were edge of cloud computing, it's typically devices more like the sensors in a factory, the cameras doing the quality assurance of the pills or the motors or whatever that comes out of the line. It could be used in a repair shop for jet engines to assist the people actually repairing them, but you want that real-time response there. Our personal computers are not edge of cloud devices. And as you begin to look at them, we're doing all this stuff there, but we're using resources across the network. And that's where the vulnerabilities come in, but that's more of a network vulnerability than it is a local device. Now, we spoke earlier this week about some of the ransomware and some of the other things like that, and that is a risk anywhere. It's a risk in a data center, in a cloud center, on your personal devices, on your phone, and everything. But I also do want to talk about one other statement you made earlier, just to kind of be clear. You talked about how small computers are getting. When I walk into a large cloud computing center, they're the size of several football fields together. If I was earlier in this week over at the University of Texas High Performance Computing Center, which has two of the top fastest supercomputers in the world. Those are huge, very big rooms. And so you do still have those big computers around, but what they are is like in the high performance computing realm, they're made up of thousands of other computers connected together as one computer in that center. And there's still a few of the supercomputer centers that use more monolithic, but it's there. But what we have to do with all these is we have to understand security is important. Security is important at the edge of cloud. It's important at the intermediary reports. It's important in the cloud centers. And it's important going back to the people who are using the services that are being provided at the edge of cloud. And I don't know if that makes sense to you, Mark, but that is there because
no, that makes a lot of sense. I can definitely say that makes a lot of sense. I'm still worried about you having the picture of me and the video of me when I was a little kid playing football with my cousins, and you having the picture of Dr. Sharif in his diapers, because I know that that's what you have from that other dimension. So I'm still concerned about that and all along those lines.
I wouldn't worry about that one. I would really worry more about the one of you drinking those shots of tequila, but that's another story.
That's another story.
But no, but this whole area is so dynamic and growing. And again, like I said, the movement to edge of cloud and even the fog and other computing issues is to address some of the network limitations and really the bandwidth. You know, we have a lot of bandwidth, but they're always going to use as much bandwidth that's out there, and it's never going to be enough. And latency. latency is a huge problem with some of these applications, and even as we go to the edge of cloud. What latency is it's the time needed to send data between 2 points on the network. I can tell you what surprises me today is I'm in Austin.
Mhm.
Sharif is broadcasting, controlling this in Malaysia, and my video signal is going from here through him, through the SteamYard servers, and back to me. So there's a lag time between I move my hand here and now when it showed up on the screen. And so it's that much of a lag time, and that is latency. And this is a perfect example of why latency in edge of cloud is trying to work to solve this latency problem. And latency really delays the analytics. It delays how you can be in real time. It delays the decision process, and it even will cause bad manufacturing or cost life, for example, in an autonomous vehicle. And the last part of it is one of the reasons you go to edge of cloud is on the network side to look at congestion on the network. And as we've done these broadcasts with Sharif, we see that often in parts of the world where the congestion rates are real high. For example, Sharif's board member in Jordan, he often has problems with internet. It's not that he doesn't have just connectivity, but the congestion in that part of the world is very high because they don't have enough bandwidth. And it's also very high because they're using older technologies to transmit it.
And that's one of the things I was wondering about, even in terms of the technology, because even on Pod TV we run into that issue because we had a show from Nigeria that is on temporary hiatus. I'm hoping that brother might go come back because he was having bandwidth issues, and that's actually a very advanced nation within the African nation. But I think we were even having some issues with some of the South African shows, and definitely when I've had friends that have been business people that have visited places like Kenya, so we're not even talking about the poorer countries in the 54 or so in Africa. So it does seem like a lot of the other continents like Asia and Africa and others are having some serious.
It's even earmarked. We run into congestions across here all different times, and some of it is counterintuitive. Uh, you would think that when people are not working on the 8 to 5 shift, your bandwidth congestion might go down. Then you have everybody going home and they're streaming movies and they're doing streaming games. And as you go later in the night, you not only have that, but you have corporations who are backing up the remote offices over the network to their own data centers, and that generates a lot of traffic. And so it's that type of traffic that impacts latency, that impacts the congestion on the network, and impacts the bandwidth because some of those are very, very bandwidth intensive. And but by deploying the servers and storage to where the data is generated, where the sensors are, where the devices are, edge computing can operate many more devices over a much smaller, more efficient local area network where ample bandwidth is used exclusively by the local data generating devices. And that's the fallacy. Many people want to take these edge devices and just connect them immediately to the general internet. But there's a ton of traffic. It's better to take it over purposely built local connections, local networks at the edge of cloud. Let it do the processing and storage there, and then interject that coming back either over the general internet, over private internets and things, back to the cloud providers and back to the data centers. And that's one of the big advantages of edge of cloud computing is there. And Virginia's comment about the importance of applying artificial intelligence for the prevention and control of environmental disasters, that also plays very much into edge of cloud computing because the sensors you would use to measure different things like the image recognition you would use for that, the ability to begin to do what's called sensor fusion, which is taking a lot of different types of sensors from satellite imaging to hyperspectral imaging to on the ground sensors measuring water flow and stuff like that, and fusing them together is how you put together a situational awareness to deal with things like an environmental disaster. And Edge of Cloud plays a huge part in doing that because you need real-time information and you need to aggregate it and pull what's relevant to you and separate it from the other data that's there. So, Chris, does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. But David, how much of this is similar to what we used to do regularly with the weather department and things of that nature? Because I know we were talking about edge computing, and I'm hearing you talk about some of these things that are climate and weather based. I'm going like, this sounds very similar to what we've been doing for decades with the weather department. So is it just that some of these agencies, maybe the military and the weather we're using, are now becoming more mainstream?
Well, weather's beginning to move. A lot of what you referred to before were using larger supercomputers and using space-based resources to try to forecast the weather more accurately. So what they would do is on supercomputers or very large mainframes, they would build a model. They would take the data you have up there, and they would begin to do analysis and make forecasts on that. And it was primarily using data generated from those means. Sometimes they would put sensors on airplanes, fly them over as well, like on a hurricane. For example, you've heard about airplanes with sensors being flown in the eye of a hurricane. That's all about getting good data that can be used to run models. Where it's going today, from what you're saying, is we use the same resources. We use the same type of supercomputer models. We use the same type of things, using even more and more types of sensors from space to collect the data. We're seeing drones now used in addition to airplanes to collect data that's lower in the atmosphere. You've heard about all the weather balloons of the past. Weather balloons are kind of going away because of the drones that we're using today. But the big difference today is now we're putting more and more sensors out across the country so we can record rainfall many places. We're putting ground-based sensors there, so you begin to see, for example, weathercasts and severe storms. What's the wind shear? What's the wind direction locally? Has it changed? Is there one place over here on the side where the wind pattern is circling now, where everyone else is growing that way, and that circling's the start of a tornado, probably. But it's what it is it's the fusion of all of those ground-based sensors, air-based sensors, space-based sensors, all coming together to work. And some of those are real-time, some of them are near real-time, some of them are historical as you begin to look and build those models. But the key thing on them is they all take computing. The more computing you can do where the closer to the sensor is, the better you're going to be. And the important thing is the fusion of all that information together to create a complete view. The story I love to illustrate this to you, Mark, is when you walk out of your office today and the sidewalk's wet. Is it raining? Did somebody use the sprinkler system to water the grass and get on there? Or did the people bringing your catering order in spin something on the ground there? Or what is it? You know, you can't just take the simple model. You have to take, what we do is we take multiple data points. We'll look at that, say it's wet. We'll look up at the sky. Is it cloudy? Is it thundering? Is a sprinkler system on down over there and things? So we collect data from many different places and fuse it together.
Hey.
Answer a question like that. So that is what we're doing with cloud computing and all these resources.
No, that makes sense and everything. But the question I had that I think Dr. Sharif may be interested in this, as well as his audience, is this might be an opportunity for quote unquote second and third world countries to actually claim their place in power. Because one of the things that we were talking about earlier on one of our news shows on Pod TV is the fact that you mentioned drones earlier and some of these other kind of technologies. One of the leading forces in that now is Turkey, and Turkey is not exactly a first world nation, but it's considered a power, and it's even considered like a arms power in that sense as well. So I was wondering if this is a chance for other nations that are not the established powers to actually upset the balance, for lack of a better term, and to actually become bigger players than they would have been in the past.
Well, edge of cloud computing makes that possible for any developing nation. Where developing nations have challenges with this is most of them do not have in-nation large cloud computing facilities. They don't have in-nation supercomputers, high performance supercomputers. And so they have to go ahead and access them over the internet or private internets where they are. We're beginning to see more and more of a smaller class of high performance computing coming into place. And that is where you're going to see more and more of that going to developing nations. But the key thing is we do it in one of the smaller high performance computers makes sense is because we can do edge of cloud so that the processing can be done there and you push the results you need into the high performance computing environment. And you have to look at this as an ecosystem. You've heard me talk many times about how the world has gone to a system of systems. And it's so true here. So Mark, just on your phone, you talk on your phone, you do data on your phone, you watch movies on your phone, you use the GPS that's built into your phone. It has an accelerometer built into it. Oh, you can even shoot pictures. You can make movies with your phone. I can do all these things with that little device that is in the palm of my hand. And so what is it? What type of device is it? And that's what we have to do is we look at the ecosystem. The reality is your smartphone is an edge of cloud computing device. And to do all of those things, it reaches back across the network and uses higher performance computers and uses other data sets to do that. When I bring up Waze or Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever you're using, part of that processing is on your phone, part of the sensors are on the phone, but then you go and use the other resources across the network. So that is edge of cloud computing in action. When you're with that, going back to those sources, that is really a great use case example of edge of cloud computing. And you begin to see the same thing like in manufacturing. You see it in farming, a lot in farming now. The growth of artificial intelligence, sensors, and edge of cloud computing in farming is just taking off everywhere. You see it in networks, safety, healthcare, transportation, retail, everywhere. I love an example I saw earlier this year. One of the big AI companies actually headquartered here in Austin, that is a spin out. The guys worked earlier on IBM Watson. And one of their key applications is safety. So, when you've been on a manufacturing floor or on an oil rig or something, and you see the red lines drawn around a piece of tooling, it says, don't get in there. They have cameras there that will alert you if you do. They have cameras that will alert you if you don't have your safety equipment on, if you don't have the hard hat on, if you don't have the gloves on and stuff like that. That is real-time edge of cloud computing helping you to be safer. Offshore oil rigs. Offshore oil rigs have on average over 350,000 sensors on it. One offshore oil rig. And that's a lot. You cannot take all of those and bring them back to a central location and use them to go back, or you are going to have some of the environmental disasters on those oil rigs. You're going to have real challenges. So you've got to use this type of model to be effective in what you're doing and how you're using them. Just think about in your car, a self-driving car, and we're not quite there yet. It needs to make decisions in microseconds and nanoseconds. And I can't, if my network's congested and it's delayed because I have the congestions like we talked about earlier, boy, that's going to be real problems for me in a self-driving car or a self-driving ship or a self-flying airplane. So all of these have to come together and be used to enable where we're going with our future computing environments.
Mr. Mark, anything? Any questions you have?
I've got to figure out what my little phone can do, because I know I've got to figure out how I can. He's talking about all of that smartness and all of that stuff that those phones have and everything. And I know that a lot of people, in particular our young people, are talking about the power of the phone. And yes, I've definitely used the camera and I've used the video, but maybe it's just because I've got an Android as opposed to an iPhone. I don't have as many apps. Like I would love to have hundreds of apps, but I think I've only got maybe about 15 or 20 apps, including some games and some other stuff. But I do know some people that seem like they have got a super phone, because their phone seems to have multiple apps, and I'm sure that they have got those memory cards, because I think David had mentioned that to me before, that you can get a memory card that can make it even stronger than it might be initially, because I'm sitting there going like, hey, all I've got is, because it tells me I'm too loaded on storage, because it's a very basic Android and all of that. So I might have to move into and graduate into the advanced phone so I can have the super phone and all of that, and can get some of these video games and even some of these programs that are aids into your business that I want on my phone that I don't have yet, and all of that. So I might have to figure out how to make my phone stronger than it actually is.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor David Smith, what's the concluding remarks for today's session, and what you want to advise the Asia Pacific youth communities, how they can engage with the age of computing, and what they can develop for future?
Well, one thing is, particularly in the developing nations, you need to look at the concept of data sovereignty, and where the data is, where it's being built, and how it can be used. That is a real important thing. Edge security is real important going forward as you look there, and the impact on it. You're seeing places come. The connectivity is an issue. Developing nations really need to spend time understanding that the need for bandwidth is not now just in the core major cities. The need for bandwidth and connectivity is extending out anywhere that commerce is done, anywhere transportation is done in the nation. And they have to take that into account and use it. I love one of the points, and one of the very recent things that Phillips published about is that they put the edge of cloud device next to existing CT scanners. And what they were able to do is they were able to bring AI and deep learning and image recognition to the CT scanner, and they were able to increase the performance of that CT scanner by 188% without making any changes in hardware or software on the scanner, just by beginning to pull edge of cloud computing into that. Think of what that could be in the developing world, where you're trying to go back to more centralized EU or North America or other type of resources for that computing power. And that's going to be a game changer as you look at the whole 5G that's growing. 5G is really all about edge of cloud computing, because 5G is not just putting more bandwidth out, but it's also putting more and more power to the edge of the cloud. And it's going to be really there. So you're going to see a lot of things with this, which will enhance the IoT solutions. It's going to reduce the amount of bandwidth and effort to manage those devices. It's going to empower business process automation optimization. And really, when you get to it, at the end of the day, what cloud computing does is it empowers the organization to use it. It empowers the countries it's deployed in. It deploys what is being used to enhance the GDP of the region, to enhance the advanced technology solutions that are applied in the region, And cloud computing is just such a critical part of it. But you really have to look at an infrastructure view as part of that too, because edge of cloud computing will change infrastructure. Great example for you, Mark, is when COVID hit and all of a sudden you had all the people working from home. You had schools sending students home and they were doing all their classes remote. We had problems because our network wasn't architected for that much bandwidth from the home. And we had to fix that during COVID. That same type of things we did fixing that for COVID, we have to do for cloud computing, edge of cloud computing as well. So that's kind of, I think, Sharif, probably my concluding remarks. It's a great topic, and it's one that's very important for the government, for the company, for the universities, and for the users, all within all the regions who are watching this program.
Thank you, Mr. Markley. What's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Sorry about that. Yeah, the concluding remarks is that I'm looking forward to learning much more from David and Rob about this wonders of what's going on in the computer world, including about this edge computing, and maybe I'll become advanced in this and get a degree in this to go with my journalism degree, maybe even at the age of like 70 or 80, because it's never too late to learn, and all along those lines. So folks that are out there, I don't want you to think that the computer world needs to be beyond your realm of learning if you're in like a third or second world country, or even if you're of a older age range. Like I said earlier this month, I hit the big 60, and I know that I'm always learning new things as well. So that's my concluding remark, is that I am glad that you are doing this on a regular basis, Dr. Sharif, and I'm looking forward to continuing to learn and give insights when I can, but definitely also be part of the learning community as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Markley. Thank you, Professor David Smith, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. We're just finishing our 595 episode. Yes, we are trying to engage with the youth community in developing nations, and through this process, they are actually learn more about different kind of technology, about modern science, engineering, and technology. So that is the objective of World Health Economy Forums, and we have more engagement. We are engaging with the more developing nations community. Maybe we can bring more interesting project for our youth community. We need more of your support. I request all of our audience, please share our content with your government agencies, with corporation, and with academy. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. Thank you, Professor David Smith. Thank you, Mr. Markley, and thank you, Pod TV, for your continuous support and collaborations through this Pod TV. I think our audience can watch it in Roku. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Markley. Anything you want to add?
Nope, you did a great job as always. Like you said, definitely go to Pod TV Live where you can see this show aired, as well as several of our other programs also. So always glad to see. And I see we've got another person, Virginia, that was saying hello. That might have been the person from Brazil, but definitely on my wish list of places to go visit and all of that. So definitely looking forward to more of these great communications and all of that. Matter of fact, I saw that they were also saying about how Brazil had been impacted by some urban disasters. So I'm sure that will also be playing a part as well. So definitely looking forward to that. Hey, by the way, I don't think Dr. Sharif saw this, but there was a question for you, David. But oh no, she was making a statement, but she was saying that it's right that the network congestion is a critical issue, as it is markedly diminished the performance of any effective action. So she was giving you praise. You got praise from Brazil. That's a great thing, and all of that. So got praise from both
Mark,
there in Brazil.
When you go to Brazil, every time I go there, my problem is I gain weight there because the food is so wonderful. The people are so kind. But Virginia also needs to throw places like San Jose de Campos on there and Caratinga, because Caratinga is their high-tech manufacturing center. And the growth of sensors there and the environmental impact from some of the chemicals and things to use are a problem. That is where edge of cloud computing these sensors will have impact. Other one in Brazil, one of the largest users of edge of cloud in Brazil is Petrobras, with all of their oil materials and things around it. and they have become a tremendous user and probably have the largest supercomputer in Brazil there. So, Virginia, I love your input as you watch the programs.
Thank you, everyone. And tomorrow we have our special episode. We do debate. So from the like you can learn from the debate like how technology make us progressive or it's make us lazy. So from the government side, we have Professor Rob, and from the opposition side, we have Professor David Smith. So hopefully this debate will be very effective and very interesting. And Mr. Markley, definitely
No,
you can
Dr. Sharif,
join.
I was going to say, aren't we supposed to discuss tomorrow? Because I think that's going to be a very vigorous discussion whether the computers and other things are making us poor old humans lazy and all of that. So definitely that should be a powerful discussion
It's
and
a
a
debate. It's
great
an open
discussion
debate.
that people need
So
to join
yeah,
tomorrow and all of that. And we do know that, there are impacts
yeah,
maybe even on the mother nature and the economy by all this energy that we're expending in the computer world as well. Hey, David, I learned today that one of my favorite butterflies is now on the extinct list. I don't know if you saw that, but the monarch, which is a very pretty butterfly, is now on the extinct list.
Wow.
That isn't because of some of the things that we're doing in the technology world and all of that. But we might have to get to a show about that as well, whether we're impacting some of our furry and winged and other kinds of friends as well, because that could be a deep debate also.
Yes. Well, I'm looking forward to it because the computer has made me both lazier and more productive, so I get to play both sides.
That is
yeah.
true.
Excellent. So
And the
hopefully
computer
tomorrow.
also lets you be a butterfly.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you, Professor David Smith, and thank you, Mr. Markley, for joining today's sessions. And hopefully tomorrow's debate will be more interesting, and our audience can learn many things. So thank you. Bye bye, and take care.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.